how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Angela, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
Good. Love the quilt behind you. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you. It's my mom's. Yours is beautiful too. Actually, they kind of go together.
Yes. Maybe we both like bright colors.
We do. That is true. My mother does too. So
That's awesome. Fabulous. So, what should we talk about today?
today we're going to be talking about different quilting systems as far as there's really only three different kinds of quilting systems you can use. When you break them down to their most basic form. And it's, stationary systems, which would be domestics or sit down long arms, um, hoop systems, right, which would be a hoop that you're pulling a long arm over. And then you're what you traditionally think of as a long arm, which is roller systems. So systems that have big rollers that we roll the quilts on. And really, that's it. Those are the three different systems. So today we want to talk about those three systems and how they're all valid ways to quilt.
Very much so. And the
So,
pluses and minuses, and and it is also just opinion.
yeah, it's just
It's just
opinion.
opinion.
I don't know about you. I use all three.
Hmm.
So, and if we start with the most basic version, which would be your domestic sewing machine, right? Or a sit
Right.
down long arm, most of us
Um,
have that already, right?
right.
So a lot of us started out quilting on our domestic machines. Now, I will be honest, I did not start out free motion quilting on my domestic machine. Um, I used my walking foot
Same.
and I used it a lot. Um, and it was it was a great way to quilt. My reason for getting a long arm was not because I couldn't quilt on my domestic. It was because I wanted to free motion quilt and I wanted the ease of having the roller system, right? So,
Hmm.
kind of one of the downsides of a domestic system is that you have to sandwich your quilt um, before you can quilt it. So, you end up doing it either on a table or on the floor. Most of the time is how we're doing it. And
Hmm.
you're pin basting or spray basting to get those layers together before you can quilt. So that's kind of the biggest pro, or sorry, the biggest con of a domestic system or a sit down system for me was having to sandwich stuff. Um, but that being said, once it was sandwiched, it was not bad, right? There's a lot of weight that you have to deal with if you're doing a big quilt. Um, but I was able to get quilts done, and that was the most important thing. So yeah.
Oh, I think the basting and the pin basting, I mean, no matter what you do, I use this analogy, I think, in like floating versus not floating. No matter what you do, there's work,
There
right?
is.
So whether you're basting or putting your quilt on a roller, either way, there's going to be work. It's just whatever makes you happy. Or, some people don't want to spray baste when they make their sandwich. They want to pin baste. I mean,
Right.
it's opinion. But the great thing is we have all of these fabulous options, right? And there's great videos on using I love the fact of watching videos with people spray basting with pool noodles. Such a great
Yeah.
tool. A pool
Yeah.
noodle.
So I learned to pin baste on a table using a 2x4
There you go. Yes.
because you uh we would actually roll the the ends of our backing onto the 2x4 and pin them in there and then just drop those 2x4s and it would keep them flat.
Right. Right.
And that's the lady who taught me how to do that was a hand quilter.
There you go.
So, and she goes, "This is how I've always done it." Um, so there's a lot we can learn from hand quilting and adapt into machine quilting too. And I mean, that's I think where we it all started. Well, it is where it all started. Let's be
It
honest.
is.
But it's I think we go both ways now that we are also impacting hand quilting too. Because some of our stuff is like, especially with the roller system, I can baste a quilt really quick, right, and then hand it
Mhm.
off to a hand quilter to quilt. Um, and it takes a lot of their work out of it. So yeah, but
Right. Oh, for sure. Um, I think it's a great way to even dabble in if you're going to like free motion quilting, or because the walking foot is just such a fabulous tool.
Yeah, and you can do really intricate quilting with a walking foot. I
Mhm.
mean, it it doesn't have to be straight lines across your quilt. You can make curves with a walking foot.
Mhm. Especially
Um,
with the machines nowadays with their walking feet. I know for sure Janome has their feet, and Elna, their feet are fabulous for that.
well, and Janome, Elma, Pfaff all have integrated walking feet. Other people
Mhm.
may too, but I know those 3 brands do for sure. And so your walking foot is kind of always there, right? You're just putting a different foot on the bottom of the system and engaging that um the the integrated part of it. In our case, it's an AccuFeed foot, right?
Mhm.
Um it, so it's not like having to have a separate foot and try to wiggle it onto the machine like I did when I first started doing this. I find it a lot easier to use my AccuFeed than I do a traditional walking foot.
Mhm.
But I did. I mean, I quilted a lot of quilts with a walking foot.
Mhm.
Because I had to prove to my husband that I was going to actually quilt for a while before he'd buy me a long arm.
There you go.
So yeah.
Oh,
So yeah,
and I don't know about you, but the walking foot just made me fall in love with that whole texture part of it.
yeah, it did. I mean, and but you're also going to know pretty quick if creating that texture is what brings
Mhm.
you joy or not. If if piecing the piece is what brings you, or piecing that quilt is what brings you joy, right? Quilting may not be for you, the physical quilting of the quilt. And that's
Right.
okay because you can work with someone who that does have that joy from the quilting, right? So
Absolutely.
have it professionally quilted if it doesn't bring you joy. Completely valid. And we encourage people who don't find joy in it to quilt by check. We'll,
Right.
we'll all handle that for you, right? But, you know, if it does bring you joy, figure it out and then progress through what's going to bring you the most joy, right?
There you go. There
Um,
you go.
I still occasionally will sit down and I do now free motion quilt on stationary machines. And I loved the APQS George when it was out. I would sit down and quilt on it just because I needed to calm down or I wanted some zen and alone time, right?
Right.
So, and I wasn't doing as big of projects as I would be doing on my long arm.
Mhm.
So I do free motion quilt on stationary machines now. But when I first started, I didn't do it until I had a long arm. And this is the reason for that in my case. Is I've got some learning disabilities that come into play. And so retraining my brain to pull the fabric underneath the needle and try to learn the design at the same time was too much for me to handle at one time. I could do it with the walking foot because I felt like I had control. As soon as I put my hopping foot onto my domestic machine, my brain would just shut down.
Yes. It's
So
Mhm.
I I wasn't able to process it and do it, which is fine, right? So I did everything with my walking foot. Um, and then I played with my friend's long arms and I was like, this is like drawing with a pencil. I can do this, right? So I went from not doing any free motion to the day I bought my long arm doing only free motion. And I didn't do pantographs. I only free motion quilted.
That's pretty cool.
So yeah. So that's another thing is understanding it how your brain works and your creative process, right?
Mhm.
Is it something that you're going to actually be able to be successful at? I figured out pretty quickly I wasn't going to be successful. So I trained my brain a different way. Now, once I learned how to do the path and I only had to concentrate on training my brain to, move the pencil underneath or the piece of paper underneath the pencil, I
Mhm.
was able to do it. Right.
Mhm.
So I just had to take one of those two, hurdles out of my way to be able to do it. So don't let yourself become frustrated either. Right.
Right. And it takes time. We did not learn cursive all in a day or a week. I would say I'm still learning to take time my time on my handwriting sometimes because I can get pretty sloppy if I don't
Oh, yeah.
concentrate, right?
Yeah. And every once in a while, I still revert to printing.
There you go. I mean, calligraphy takes people to who do calligraphy. It's kind of like the same thing, right? Takes
Yeah.
lots of practice in different modes and different, yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the hoop system. So we talked about the domestic machine and
Mhm.
maybe a sit down mid arm like George or the Miyabi for Juki.
Uh-huh.
And Bernina has one, but and Handy Quilter has one, the Sweet 16. Let's talk about uh the hoop system because there's a different ways of hoop system. There's embroidery and there's a little hoop table that you can put your quilt on.
Yeah, and I kind of think of embroidery as kind of a hybrid between sit down and a hoop system, what we would consider a quilting system, hoop system, right?
Right.
And quilting with your embroidery module on your domestic, completely valid too. I mean, it gets the quilt quilted, right?
Mhm. Especially
Um,
with the newer models that are coming out with these monster hoops that you can probably hula hoop around. They're getting to be so big. They're
yeah,
amazing.
some of them will quilt, about a quarter of a baby quilt at a time. I'm like, it's
Yes.
amazing how much they can quilt.
Right.
So yeah, and it gets you, it can get you those perfect shapes that you would get off of a computerized long arm, right?
Right.
So it's kind of, and you only have the one investment of the sewing machine you're using if you only have the one machine, right?
Right.
So i- it's valid, right?
Mhm.
It's something that I understand. Like I've done quilting on an embroidery on my embroidery module on small things.
Mhm.
I have not tried to do a pantograph yet, and that's something that Jake and I have been talking about that we want to play with, um, when, uh, when he's out of, waiting for baby mode and, I
Yeah.
actually figure out how to have free time. So
Baby. Baby time is coming real soon, real close to this taping, actually. So it's gonna be amazing and fun.
yeah.
The tiebreaker is in I have 8 grandchildren, 4 girls, 4 boys. Tiebreakers in the oven.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So
but it is amazing again with the embroidery options and more designs as I see are coming out in the hoop style where there's an easy start stop. The manufacturers are making it easier and easier for that as an option.
well, and there's some powerhouse design groups out there that are driving this too, right?
Mhm,
That are driving being able to do things on your domestic machine, which I think is fabulous,
mhm,
right? So it doesn't make it less just because you did it on an embroidery machine, and that kind of I always kind of find it interesting when I'm standing back and listening to people at quilt shows, and someone says, "Well, they cheated. They used a long arm, or they cheated. They used an embroidery machine." I'm like, is it a quilt? Is it hanging here?
mhm.
Then it's not cheating. Like, and standing there looking at one that had a ribbon the last show I was at, and they were saying she cheated. She shouldn't have gotten a ribbon. And I was like, and I asked the lady flat out, "Are you a quilter?" "Well, no, but my grandmother did it by hand." "Yeah, well, so did my grandmother. But if my grandmother walked into my long arm store, she'd be going, 'You go, sister,' because
Yes.
her whole goal in life was to put quilts on her baby's beds. So she could have put them on their more beds faster. And my great grandmother had 10 kids. So she has 50 grandkids, right? And
Mhm.
there's great grandkids now too. She would, if she was still alive, she'd still be trying to put quilts on all our beds, right?
And
So yeah,
just
and the other thing is that if you're not even trying, yeah, you don't get to say who's cheating and who's not. You know?
it's just somebody's opinion. You do not
Yeah.
have to agree with them.
Well, the problem is like the person who had done the quilt was standing there and they didn't know it. And I'm like, oh
Oh,
no, you
that's a little bit,
know,
yeah.
it's not cheating. And the lady said, "You really don't think it's cheating?" I was like, absolutely not.
Well, I would just throw that back at her going, "And I'd like to see you produce this."
Yeah. Do you break all your bread by hand or do you cheat and buy bread that's already, baked and sliced?
Mhm.
Uh,
Oh, wait, or is it cheating not making your own thread, or making your own fabric, or making your own fibers?
yeah.
Where do we draw
Well,
that line?
yeah. That coat you made, that
Yeah.
coat you're wearing right now,
Yeah.
you didn't make that. That's cheating. Yeah. So,
Right.
you know,
So
I just think that we all need to be a lot more tolerant and, you know,
Kind.
kind. Yeah, kind. And it's when, especially like in a show, you are being judged on the technique you're using and if you did it well. Like you're not being judged on was what you did harder than somebody else, right? That could come into play down the road, but the initial judging of that quilt is did you use the tools you were trying to use well?
Mhm. And again,
So
judging is an
it's
opinion.
it's an opinion.
So
But yeah, it's an
I
opinion.
just what really matters is what's in within the quilter's heart and who it's going to or who it's for.
I don't disagree with you, Kathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that yeah, I feel like we can get so down in the weeds that everything that we do is good. I mean, not every I mean everything in the quilting world, but there's just no quilting police and we just need to I think it's just kind of funny how people I'm cheating or whatever.
Yeah,
They're all valid methods.
yeah, most people I don't think are gonna say I'm cheating, right?
No,
I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm happy with it, right? So
right.
it's others that judge you and don't let them
Well,
get in your head.
don't let them be in your head. Exactly. We've talked about this before and I'll say it again. Whenever we teach somebody how to do a paper pantograph, we tell them that you are going to go off the lines. Yes, but that pantograph is not next to your quilt when it's hanging in a show so somebody can critique it stitch by stitch. No. We could we dish on ourselves and we say, "Oh my gosh, I made a mistake here, 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 and here." And we need to learn how to stop that.
Yeah. That's our own letting negative thoughts live in your head is not worth it. I mean, the quilt is going to get used.
Yes.
Your grandchild is not going to realize you didn't follow the path of a pantograph when he's building a, quilt fort out of that quilt. So it's
Right.
just,
He likes to
yeah, I
say
tell him,
things.
they're guidelines. Think of
Yes.
it more like Pirates of the Caribbean. They're guidelines, you know?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, then if we got the hoop system, let's talk about some of the machines that are coming out into the industry a little bit more for people who cannot have a whole roller system.
So yeah, long arm hoop systems. So the
Yes.
one that we're the most familiar with is obviously the APQS Ellie on the Halo table because Kathy and I both have those in our stores. Um, they're fabulous, and they're that hybrid between a sit down, a stationary system, right, and a roller system
Absolutely.
because you can sandwich your quilt before you load them, or
Mhm.
you can load it the same way we load a long arm. And it kind of depends on, at least in my experience, it is dependent on how big the quilt is. Um, if the quilt is wider than my Ellie, I
Mhm.
seem to get fewer pleats and have better results if I pre-sandwich.
Yes.
If it all fit in the width of the Ellie and it's just longer, the same way it is on my long arm, I have full floated and been just fine. So it's going to depend on.
Explain full before we move forward. You just said
Okay.
a term there that some people might not understand. Full floating. Explain full floating.
So
'Cause that's a
full
good
floating
term.
is when you put your backing onto a system and it's all taut and sitting flat and ready for you to lay everything down onto. So you're putting just the part you can see in the quiltable space of the hoop or the rail system, and then you put your batting on top of it and smooth that out. We typically will sew a straight line across the top of the batting so that we have an alignment line for the quilt top. And then we lay the quilt top on top of the batting and smooth it out. And then we'll stabilize the edge. I just sew the edges of mine down to the batting and the backing. And then I can quilt that area. And then when I go to move the quilt, I slide the whole thing up, right? And I make sure the backing is still nice and flat, make sure the batting doesn't have any ripples or pleats in it, and then smooth my quilt top over it, sew the edges down, and then start quilting again. So you're only dealing with the part of the quilt that is in the frame or the hoop at that moment. right? And then you're
Hmm.
moving it. And the reason it's called a full float is goes back to long arms. And when we're talking about floats, it's what part of the quilt top is attached or not attached. So a full float would mean that the quilt top itself is not physically attached to any rollers or the hoops. It's just laying there.
Fabulous. Thank you for taking the time to do that.
It's like, you know, so there's lots of different ways you can load a long arm, but
Oh, for
that's
sure.
the easiest way that I have found to deal with the situation on Ellie if I don't want to pre-sandwich. Because
Hmm.
sometimes I don't want to. I've already told you that's a hang up of mine, right?
Oh, always for sure. Can I just get the machine rolling faster, get those stitches in the quilt? That's what we want to do, right? As
I just
fast as
make it.
possible.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So
yeah.
I would say the hoop system that you have the machine that you're moving the machine versus moving the fabric is perfect
Excuse me, sorry.
for all kinds of size quilts. Don't get me wrong, but it's really good for somebody who's definitely into thread art. So I feel like
Mm,
thread art is such a fabulous, quick and down and dirty,
yeah.
get that on the long arm and get going, or on your hoop system and get it rolling.
Yeah, I used to say George when we had George was a
Hmm.
good thread art machine because smaller throat, you have a lot of control, and um, there's just a lot you can do. Being you have a little more freedom in
Hmm.
how you're moving your quilt top and stuff than you do on a long arm. Um, but now I'm like Ellie. Ellie is it, right? So being able to draw with your needle and still have all that freedom,
Sure.
it's awesome. So
Right.
yeah, and there's other manufacturers that have things
Yes.
similar to that to the Ellie. Like I said, that's the one we're familiar with because that's the one we get to play with on a daily basis.
Sure. On a daily basis. Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I get to go load mine here after this. And because we're in the middle of Shop Hop, having a great little price on her. So it's really kind of fun. And she's up front. I love the fact that I can put her up front because she's small enough to have up front.
Yeah, she's up front in my showroom too. Yeah.
Yes, she is right in your window. It's beautiful.
Yes, she is right in my window. She is the star of the show.
There you
Um,
go.
and I I can truthfully say when they first talked about the concept of doing this, I'm like, why? Like, because I was so ingrained in that roller system because it's what I wanted for so long, and and what I've had for so long at this point. But then I played on her. Yeah,
She's good.
she's good. She's really good.
She's good.
So yeah. So I think and even if you want to do a huge quilt on her, she still works. I mean, that's the part. If I didn't have a long arm and I was choosing between a stationary machine and a hoop system, I'd go with the hoop system still because it's still a little bit easier to manage,
There you go.
right? So it's got a lot of pros to it. I mean, and it has a couple cons too. Like so, because you do have to move that quilt, and you're going to have the weight of the quilt as you're moving it.
Hmm.
And with a hoop system, it can be a little more of a challenge to keep things straight.
Sure.
It's not impossible, right? Not impossible at all.
Just
You just
a
have to
little
pay
bit
a
more
little more
work.
attention. Yeah, it's some more work, and
A
like we're
tiny
talking
bit.
pros and cons here. So that would
Yeah.
be the one con, and I'm telling you, it's not that huge of a deal, right?
Right.
Um, so she's got lots and lots of pros to her. Um,
Absolutely.
and then we have the one that is near to dear to my heart, and that's the roller system.
Yes.
I mean, eh, I'm spoiled.
Well,
There
it's
are
for
the cons are going to be size. I mean, it takes so much space. If you don't have the space, you just don't have the space. That's
right.
going to be the biggest con of a roller system is the sheer amount of floor space they take. And if you have a really good system, those rails and rollers don't bend.
Right.
They don't break apart. They are one piece, preferably steel construction. For real rollers, we do use aluminum on our rails to keep the weight down on our frames, but um, the even like the bliss, dowel rod that goes on it is steel. So
Hmm.
lots of steel to keep things nice and rigid, right?
Right.
Um, so and you don't, if you have a joint, I've had a system that had a joint, or my mom had a system that had a joint in the middle,
Same.
and you have to know where that joint is and kind of pop the machine over it as you're going. So invariably I would either pop too soon, right? Or I would forget it, and I would go into I'd have a jarring line where I hit the joint.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, pros and cons to those systems as well. But
And I'd also say different. I don't know if I'm going to necessarily be quilting for others
mm,
on my like embroidery machine or my hoop table per se. That's going to be more of me working for myself. Whereas the sit down machine, I can work for others, but it's definitely custom, which takes longer. But
mhm.
then the roller system brings in the whole versatility if you're working for others.
Well, I think if you're doing custom, you could do it on a hoop frame too. Um,
And you can, you're right. Right.
yeah,
It's either it's
I
time's
think what
consuming.
you're trying to say is return on investment, right?
Yeah.
So uh, the other really big plus on a long arm is the ease of doing like a pantograph or doing it either digitally or hand guided, um, because that's how you make your money the quickest.
Right.
So, and that's like I said, lots of pros for the long arm. I mean, you quilt a zone or quilt an area of the quilt, you roll it up, you quilt the next row, and you just go. And I can literally get a king size quilt done in, under 4 hours.
Right. And I have a lady in Lincoln, one of our customers, she smashes quilt on there. She starts with her smallest size and then keeps rolling. Wait, she starts with
I
her
guess.
biggest size, and then rolls down to her smallest size. So she might have 5 quilts on her roller.
Mhm.
And that's how, because she goes, I just load once. I sew the backs together, load them all on, and off she goes.
You can
She's
see me
pretty
smiling.
amazing.
I've done that so many times. And
Right.
if you have a zipper system and your zipper system is keyed so that the backing is using both sides of a separating zipper, you can just zip them together at the bottom, the bottom of one quilt to the top of the next one, and just keep loading.
There you go. Look at that. See?
Yeah.
So there's definitely pluses and minus to all are valid, all are good. We're not going to like judge ourselves because we did something on one thing or another, or we hand quilted. Hand quilting is all of this is just beautiful work. It's our work that we're given to others.
Okay, so if I had the time and the skills, which I don't have the skills, but if I had the time and the skills, I'd love to hand quilt. I don't have the time and the skills. I mean, and I don't have time to build the skill either. So
Right.
I think hand quilting is beautiful though. It,
Right.
they're all valid. In my world, is if it got quilted and someone's using it, it's a win.
There you
It,
go.
it's keeping our industry and the art form that we love alive.
Mhm.
So I mean, I think that if you're quilting and you're getting your stuff done, however you're doing it,
Fabulous.
thumbs up for me. I mean, keep
And
doing it.
I bet there are people that do get their quilts done multiple ways, not just one way, not just on the long arm, not just by a walking foot, and not just by a
Mhm.
hoop system.
Yeah. I know for a fact that there are people that have had one quilt quilted by two long armors.
There you go.
So one long armor did pantograph edge to edge, or border to border on the quilt. And then the second long armor reloaded the quilt and did a very custom border around the edge of it. Right.
Pretty cool.
So I mean, eh, you're only limited by your imagination.
That's right. So keep on quilting. Use
Keep
whatever machine
quilting.
you want. Try them all. They're fabulous.
Yeah.
We say
And
yes
post
to them
pictures
all.
if you post pictures of what you're doing on the Quilting Academy. We'd love to see pictures.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, with that, look at that. We're at half an hour already. Time is flying by.
Yay!
I love it. I can talk quilting all day long. Oh, wait, I do.
Yeah, we do. We get to do this all day long. Yeah. So don't forget to like, subscribe, comment for us, tell us things you'd like us to talk about.
Right.
Um, we love the internet interaction with you guys. Make sure you're posting on the Quilting Academy. If you're not a member, there's a link below so you can join. Right. And we're looking forward to talking to you again soon.
All right, guys, stay quilting. Keep on going.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.